who will be moderated by Matteo Magnani, who I'm going to introduce. Matteo is a senior policy analyst with experience in international NGO spaces. His research and advocacy focus on the intersection between production and consumption of system with environmental policies. He co-leads the Atlas policy team, and he will introduce also our distinguished guest for this session. Welcome.
Thank you, Francesco. It's a big honor to be here hosting this panel with such great, wonderful speakers. So this panel will be all about the future of global freedom and democracy. And especially we will discuss the idea of potentially building a new coalition for freedom. Potentially discussing whether it's a good idea, whether it's a bad idea, what separates it from it, and how close we may be. And that, of course, is in response to today's increasing distrust into international institutions, as well as the double standards that many countries all over the world are upholding, sometimes supporting freedom, sometimes definitely failing to do so. And what's important about the panel is we'll not only paint a picture of what we want to see, so the vision, the intellectual side of it, but we'll get concrete into examples and practical actions that could be taken to get closer to that and how to solve this issue in a systemic manner. So I'm going to introduce the speakers. Very excited about that. So firstly, Oleksandra Romantsova, which is just... Second, from online, Virginia Fiume, who's the visiting fellow at the School of Transnational Governance at the European University Institute. Hi, Virginia.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Where are you dialing in from so we can feel a bit closer to you?
I'm in Florence, actually, so quite close, not enough, but I'll do my best to share the energy with the room.
Quite close, thank you, Virginia. Next one, Carine Kanimba, who is the spokesperson for the World Liberty Congress. Hi, Carine. Next one, George Katrougalos, who's the United Nations independent expert. United Nations independent expert on the promotion of a democratic and equitable international order. And last but not least, our very own Salvador, co-founder of Atlas, and challenging the United Nations Secretary General selection process. George, I'm going to start with you. So we already have international institutions such as the United Nations that are supposed to and are designed to uphold global freedom and human rights internationally, yet we're seeing them failing to do so in all cases. Could you paint a picture of actually what good looks like? So if they worked, how would it be that they do work? And what obstacles are preventing them from actually doing it and succeeding it at all times?
Thanks for the question. Let me first say how glad I am to be among you, mostly young people who care. This is important because we are in an era of depoliticization, especially among the young people. You're right to put this question. We have heard also in the morning a lot of healthy criticism vis-à-vis the United Nations. What the United Nations have done for Ukraine or for the genocide in Gaza. Let me first remind you what the first General Secretary of the United Nations has said about the role of the organization. He has said that the United Nations are not here for bringing paradise, heaven on earth. They are here in order to avoid Earth to become a hell. Think then, what would be the situation if there was not United Nations? How we would have handled the pandemic without the World Health Organization, Would we have the Paris or the Kyoto agreements on climate without the United Nations? So my basic point is that United Nations is what we have. Of course, it's not ideal, but it contributes in keeping peace and promoting global goals like the sustainable goals, which is impossible to be promoted by individual nations. Which are the two basic problems of the United Nations? One is structural and very probably not possible to be remedied. The undemocratic nature of the Security Council. 5 countries have a veto power. This was by design. The 3 winners of the Second World War, United States, Soviet Union, United Kingdom, have tried to remedy what they considered the basic default of the League of Nations, the predecessor of the United Nations. League of Nations was functioning with consensus. Even if one country was disagreeing in the General Assembly, no agreement was possible. So they conceived the Big Five, the 3 winners, plus China, plus France, as a kind of international police, with main goal to avoid conflicts between these Big 5 countries. This has been achieved. We do not have a direct clash among the Big 5, with the exceptions of Korea, because of particularities of this period. The Soviet Union was abstaining from the Security Council, because it was not the communist China, but the nationalist China, which was presiding, which was present in the Security Council. Second, let's say, big criticism is for the economic international order. There is a call for a new economic international order already from the 60s, because now the big, let's say, division in the multipolar world where we live is not anymore between West and East after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It is the conflict between the wealthy nations of the North and the big majority of the global South. There we have, let's say, ways of transforming the United Nations, especially the international financial institutions, the so-called Bretton Woods institution, World Bank, International Monetary Fund. Just imagine that these organizations are not organized by a democratic principle, each country, one vote. They are like companies. They have shares. The absolute majority of the shares are controlled by Europe and the United States. Again, as an example, although it has been reformed recently, IMF, China has less votes than Japan, although China has 10 times the population of Japan and a much bigger economy. My final point, because I have already spoken too much. Can the situation change? My answer is, it does change. International law now, it is not like the international law in 1945. In 1945, we did not have the right of self-determination. Why? Because European states were against that, because they still had colonies. Because of the anti-colonization movement and the struggles of the global South, not only now we have, after the 60s, the right of self-determination, we have the right of to development, we have an array of rights. We have really transformed the international law. The struggles in our part of the world, in the West, the struggles of the young people in the big social movements in the 60s have also transformed rights. The rights of women are not now as they were in the 50s. The rights to difference, the rights of the people of LGBTQI people. So who can change international law? You can. The movement of the people are the basic motors of change. And as your ancestors here in Italy, the Romans were saying, Jura sunt vigilantibus scripta. The rights exist only for those who are caring for them. Thank you.
Thank you, George. So what I understand from you is that the United Nations, the Bretton Woods institutions have been designed And that means that it can also be redesigned to actually account for the obstacles that we're seeing right now. But until we do that, yeah, maybe we have a question already from online. Okay. Yeah, you want to respond to that?
Does it work? I appreciate what you're saying, but I think we are in hell. And I think the UN is failing to save us from hell. So obviously on climate, it's doing the basics. On AIDS, sometimes it does the basic, but when we consider the speech we've heard before, when we consider that close to 50,000 people have been murdered in Gaza and that the destruction is ongoing, when we consider the negotiations right now in Ukraine, it's hell. The world is burning and the UN is going to die unless we actually change it. So for me, it's a bit of a problem when I hear about the United Nations, that we consider that change is impossible in the places that actually matter, like the Security Council. It's honestly at this stage all I'm interested in, the fact that 5 countries, including Russia and the US, of course, but Russia for Ukraine, get to veto anything is mental. It's not a way of governing. Russia gets to preside sessions talking about Ukraine, talking about the invasion of Ukraine, boycotts and veto discussions from happening. It's a joke, it's a parody. How is this even possible? So when I see that, for me, it's not a question of can change happen for international law? Can change happen in the financial institutions? Yes, it must happen. But more than this, and I think we, the people, actually have power to push our national governments to do whatever is needed, we can't accept a UN that is so badly formed and where authoritarian countries or genocidal countries get to murder, destroy, break, invade, and occupy, imprison, and so on, and then just accept that is the status quo. So I know you're not accepting it, but for me, when we see the Security Council, and you mentioned it's unlikely to reform it, at this stage, either we manage, or I actually agree with people and say that I love the UN. I believe the UN is our best chance because unity is our best chance in the world. But either it responds to people's demand to reform and to have a fair, equitable, democratic way of governing, or honestly, let's move on and build something that can actually do it. But when I see how it's failing the biggest crisis from Ukraine to Palestine to Sudan to DRC to Myanmar to Venezuela, and I can keep on going to Belarus and so on, I don't understand what we're doing there. And I love this idea. I find it beautiful. I find it strong. I want it to work. But I find it very hard to convince people that it will ever do anything when the big powers, and I'm French, as you can hear from my accent, so my country is also guilty of this, when the big powers of this world get to veto and stop anything that's needed.
We just
one word. We agree that the world would be far worse without the United Nations. That's a start point. After that, we pick our fights. You can maybe have as an idea to transform the Security Council. Good luck. But the fights that matter are the fights that change the lives of people. People in Ukraine, people in Gaza. So what I'm saying to you, pick your fights carefully.
Thanks, George. That's actually a great segue to the next speakers, especially starting from Virginia online. I don't know if there's a way to swap faces so I can see Virginia from here. Otherwise, okay, thanks. No, it's okay. It's okay. Virginia, basically, we've been talking about how the UN has helped better the world, but also what limitations there are. And in this scenario, the role of individuals and also grassroots organization is actually very important. And you have been active in mobilizing and organizing communities for democratic change in both the European Union and the Mediterranean. So can you tell us a bit about the role of these movements in accelerating action in the absence of perfectly fit international institutions?
So first of all, thank you. And can you hear me well?
Yes,
Enough?
very well.
Okay, great. So I think one of the first elements that I think can help us is to try to look at governments. If we only look at governments as the place for change, I think we might risk to engage in a losing battle in a way, thinking about the heads of states, the ministries, and so forth and so on. And this could create a disencouragement, disillusion. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't trust the democratic institutions as such, but I think it's very important to try to think largely to the places where we want to see changes happen. So for example, if we see how the current right-wing waves are taking the governments through the democratic representation, I think we are really forced to think about is constructed the mechanism of the representative democracy, because they are built in a way that reproduce the injustice of the systems that we want to change. So for me, it's very important that when we think in terms of social movements, mobilization, we really try to see other arena where we can make the change happen. Examples of this discouragement that can come out is, for example, as Colombo was mentioning, the climate emergency or the Palestine situation, the income inequalities, the housing poverty. All of these struggles are seeing a huge gap between what mobilizing groups, grassroots organizations, protests in the streets are demanding for, and the inertia of the people that can take the decision. So I think our challenge is really interrogate ourselves on how we can fill that gap. And I think social movements, civil society organizations, informal collective of people have a couple of tools that are particularly important. The first one, in my opinion, is informing ourselves and our community in the sort of closer scale, and then enlarging that and self-reflecting and analyzing how these matters are rooted into inequalities, how they function, how they oppress different type of people. And sometimes this element of analysis is also what is underestimated by a mediatic perspective. If I think about Extinction Rebellion, what we see in the media, for example, for the climate emergency, we see in the media the people that are acting, the civil disobedience, the blocks of the streets and other forms of action. Or if we look at the Palestine, the movement in solidarity with Palestine, it's very easy to see the square that is erupting in the clash with the police, but you don't see all the minor steps that are analysis, reflections, dissemination of information, self-organization of communities. So I think doing this work of analysis is very important. And then I see two other tools that can help to force change. One is to try to be an element for decentering power. So to not only look at power fixed in the heads of state, in the government, but something that is way more fluid and that is everywhere. So for example, changing arenas, talking with the mayors, the regional level, the federations. Someone speaks about democratic confederalism. I think this is quite an interesting approach to look at power more distributed and with different points of change of action. And then I think there is another level, which is the practice that can be done, as I said, by the groups in itself to imagining a new world. I think George was saying, Colomb, that this difference between the ideal and the need of picking the fight. In my opinion, there is an element of building the world that we want with the practices that we put in place. I mean, it's easy to quote Gandhi, but Gandhi was saying, be the change that you want to see in the world. And I think these grassroots organizations often put in practice, for example, nonviolent communication, self-consciousness, cooperations, practicing democracy at a small scale. And all of these, in my opinion, is a way to have a processual mechanism of change that somehow maybe doesn't influence immediately the government, but the different levels that then bring to the institutional change.
Thank you. You clearly highlighted how grassroots movements are indeed important. It's important to fight battles at all levels. And Carine, I'm going to come to you next, because you've also been fighting battles at a personal level, a very personal level, because your dad, Paul Rusesabagina, sorry about that, was imprisoned because of his opposition, being in the opposition party in Rwanda, and you have been fighting for his freedom. So can you share a little more, perhaps for the people in the audience that may not be super familiar with the the history of what you've done and also tell us what you've done in this context to uphold freedom and his human rights.
Thank you, Matteo, and thank you to my fellow panelists. So my father, Paul Rusesabagina, what you may know his story and the story of Rwanda through the Hollywood film Hotel Rwanda, which tells the story of how he saved 1,268 lives during the genocide in 1994. He was the manager of a hotel in Kigali, the capital city of Rwanda. And when the genocide started, he opened the doors to the hotel to whoever could make it to the front steps to enter, and he protected them for 76 days of the genocide, risking his own life and negotiating with the killers every time they tried to come in to the people who were taking refuge inside. The movie Hotel Rwanda came out in 2004, and it gave my father an international platform not only for people to learn about what happened in Rwanda, to teach lessons of their genocide, but also he used that international platform to call attention to the human rights abuses going on, they were going on and they're still going on today in Rwanda, to call attention to the dictatorship that is in power, the same government that is credited to having ended the genocide. It has now turned into a brutal dictatorship, and he used his platform to talk about the human rights abuses being perpetrated by this regime, both in Rwanda, in the neighboring Democratic Republic of the Congo, and in the Great Lakes region of Africa as a whole. And that made him a target of this regime. So we had moved to Belgium and then the United States for safety because his life was in danger in Rwanda. And so in 2020, my father was kidnapped by the regime, taken from Texas, from San Antonio, Texas, in the United States, to Rwanda. And the regime used a spy to lure him. So they sent someone who presented himself as a priest, as a pastor, as a bishop. They knew my father is a religious, is a man of faith, he's very religious. So they utilized one of his weaknesses to get this guy to gain his trust for over 2 years, would always come to see my father, and my father ended up trusting him until this man lured him on the pretext of going to Burundi to speak at different, in front of different crowds in Burundi, which has a similar history of Rwanda genocide, to speak about reconciliation there. But this man was a spy of the regime and instead took him to Rwanda, drugged him, and then they put him on a plane that took him to Rwanda, where he was tortured for several days before being presented in front of the international media and accused of, guess what? Terrorism. A lot of dictators, as we know, utilize these as a way to silence activists, to silence critics, and manipulate the international justice system in order to silence their opponents and their critics. And so they accused him of completely fabricated charges of terrorism. That's, of course, after having tortured him and tried to make him do false confessions for several days in a hidden location. And he was put on trial. At the time, I was in Washington, D.C. So I woke up one morning and I turned on the news and I saw my father on all international media, which said the Hotel Rwanda hero is being tried for terrorism in Rwanda. Of course, we had fled Rwanda many years before. So the fact, seeing my father standing in handcuffs in front of the media in Rwanda was shocking to me, because I knew that they were going to hurt him, that they had taken him there by force, but also that the accusations against him were completely fabricated. And that's why, and when we decided to launch an international campaign for his release and mobilized the international community, we mobilized parliaments, Congress, across the world to adopt resolution and put both sanctions and as well as pressure on the Rwandan dictatorship to release him, along with 20 other people he was accused of terrorism with. And then of course, we also mobilized the media, understanding that the narrative that the regime was trying to push out globally was that my father was this evil man, not the hotel manager hero that he was, that instead he was an
evil men who had committed the most atrocious crimes in history. So we really needed to get the media to get the story straight, because that once we can get people to understand what the lies are, the tactics of this regime, then we could get them to mobilize their support, the political and diplomatic pressure to put on the Rwandan dictatorship to release him. We also mobilized the international legal community, understanding that he was being tried on fabricated charges, he was put on trial. So if we could get the international legal community to denounce the sham trial that he was subjected to as a sham trial, it was also another win. And of course, the people in general, anyone that we could get to that could say something, that could advocate, that could tell his story, was a way to ensure that he stays alive. And he always tell us that one of the best ways to keep a political prisoner alive is to keep speaking about him. So for 3.5 years, my goal and my role was to talk about him, tell his story, get people to know him, to keep him alive and stop the regime from silencing him permanently.
Did it? Did it work?
He did. He's pretty happy.
Sorry to check.
Thank you.
Okay, that's good. Oleksandra, coming to you next. Moving from fight to fight. Of course, you've already spoken about Ukraine and what it's going through due to the invasion from Russia. But I wanted to ask you, what do you think about the reaction from the international community and international institutions in light of the conflict? Do you think it was sufficient? Do you think it was not sufficient? And if not, what could have been done differently?
Okay, it's not easy question. Why so? Because it's a question, react for what? If we will speak about beginning of the war and reaction for Crimea and Donbass, it surely was not enough. Because if it was, we will not have today the next season of this horrible serial. Mostly that was a problem that Ukraine never win the comparing with any conflict going, for example, in Africa, and Ukraine's even till now better electricity system than in South Africa without war. So that's a big question that we trying to make some little bit competition. Who need to go into this session? What kind of attention journalists today will give them for this question? For me, history which you share now, that's absolutely amazing example. That's even you once was a hero that not broke the evil at your native country. So for us. We start to be older. I mean, like a society. Ukrainian society figure out that you don't have other adults in the room except you. That's bad news, guys. Adults, it's we are. And will not come other adults except maybe Martians comes. I hope still. But is a question that every time when we speak about UN, when we speak about something work, something not work, no well, other don't have this responsibility build for us such system which we need. That's a huge change of Ukrainian society. We stop being an object. We start to be a subject of acting around our own problems. And now I am understood that problem which happened in Rwanda, problem which happened in Bangladesh, problem which happened in Venezuela, that's a part of chain to have a problem at home, at Ukraine, at Italy. Because before coming to Donbass, private army, which called ЧВК Wagner, maybe you heard about them, that exists really good investigation of Italian journalists about them. They commit the war crimes at Africa 10 years, and nobody at Ukraine not listen, not read about that. till it's not calm at our home. That's why I'm always to my students and to any people tell, it's not exit the way how you can run from the war. I have one friend, she's live in Donetsk, she ran from Donetsk to Kiev, and after this she ran in 2014. In 2022, she ran from Kiev to Tel Aviv. Good place here. So it's just a question every time when we're trying to fund, there's just, oh, I have another problems. So we need to come back again at the situation. Without us, nobody built for us good place to live. And yes, I'm saying really love Fiume and think that it's we look at the problem, we need to propose something. And this proposition need to be a reaction for absolutely new kind of the war. Because Ukrainian war, it's not traditional battle in the field with the soldiers. It's a 7 levels war. We have first cyber world war now. And 3 years, Ukraine was quite successful to defend cyber space of our state. But 2 months before, they just destroyed whole virtual machine for different register inside the Ukrainian society. So just imagine tomorrow you're waking up, any recording about your tax paying, about your, I don't know, real estate, about your passport, don't exist. Because someone decided that they don't want to steal it and use it. No, they just destroy it. So we have battlefield war, we have information war, we have cyber war, we have mental war. Because that's believing of Russian population that they're not responsible for their states. It's a mental disease, seriously. And I told about my relatives thing. So for us, again, we changed. And international society look at us like a big surprise, but because most of state representative of this generation at Europe or USA never have a problem at home. We always speak about how much money we need to spend to solve problem in Colombia because we like coffee from there.
So yeah, the point about being an object versus a subject of the issue was my takeaway there. So when you become a subject, then it is also a bit easier for international movement to happen. So it starts from Ukraine and from the levels at which Ukrainian peoples are affected. Virginia, mindful you have to leave us in 15 minutes. I'm gonna go back to you, and so linking with the idea of having governments that perhaps sometimes say words, but maybe the words are a bit empty, or they have commitments, but perhaps commitments don't follow with action. What have you learned from your experience with grassroots movements on ways that government action could be accelerated? And if you could also give us perhaps some examples from your own grassroots movements.
Thank you. Yes, I think one example that somehow for me encapsulates this is the encampments for Palestine that happened last year as a transnational mobilization. I lived the experience myself in Florence. It was a very unique context because basically students, fellows, researchers, workers of 3 different universities in Florence occupied one of the main square of the city, in the city center, Piazza San Marco. So instead of doing encampments inside the university, we bring the university's communities in the city. And I think it gives some practical and concrete examples. First of all, the encampments were part of a transnational mobilization. So different groups were doing the exact same actions, but then localized them to their level and to their context. In the case of what we have done in Florence, for example, the groups, the assembly that organized the encampment focused on 4 shared demands that could be addressed to their institutions, but in the same way. So in our case, the demands were around the ceasefire, of course. It was back May 2024. It was a call for the BDS, Boycott, Divestment and Sanction campaign, which is actually a campaign that starts from the Palestinian civil society, which I think is also quite important and quite interesting. Then we asked for the creation of programs for scholars from Palestine, from Gaza, to come to here to study, and then to change the definition of anti-Semitism. I will not get into the demands. You can find a lot of information about that, but I want to mention why I think it was interesting. Again, first of all, the power of a mobilization that is broader than the city, than the context, than that as a transnational dimension. The fact to bring the demands to the square, but in a very dialogical way, like we were occupying the square or liberating, as someone would say, but we were also organizing permanent assemblies, teaching with professors and researchers that explained the situation in Palestine, but also how Palestine can be looked at, a prism to look at the injustice of society in a way. So we did a lot of dissemination activities. We were in contact with the shoppers, with the tourists of the city of Florence. So there was a level of enlarging the base of solidarity with Palestine that wouldn't be achievable with other forms of action. And I think the other element was to look at the university as an arena for change, as an institutional dimension of power, also because we were talking about public universities, for example. So looking at addressing the heads of the universities in terms of cutting ties with the war dimension, which can be Israel, but we can also be any other forms of power that use research for war purposes. I think this is also another interesting element. So in a way, I think we can learn 3 lessons from that experience. The first is the idea of the boycott, divestment and sanction tool that the Palestinian civil society designed, because it's a type of tool that can be acted upon at an individual level. I can decide to not go to a certain supermarket, to not buy certain products. It has a collective dimension and an institutional dimension, which is the divestment element, where you can use at a business level, a private level, a university level, and so forth and so on. And then you have the sanctions element, which were quite powerful in a way. I mean, a bit more powerful in the Russia-Ukraine situation, and it was less applied in the Palestinian context. So I think this 3 dimension gives civil society and movements a tool, and individuals also, to act at different levels. The second aspect, as I said, is to change the arena, but I guess a state, if it sees that 5, 6, 10 university change their relationship with an oppressive power, like in the case of Israel, probably this is a way of influencing the governmental dimension. Probably, as I said at the beginning, I don't fully trust governments, but I guess you get what I mean. And the third aspect is the use of body as a tool for political change. So I go back to my last point, but occupying a square in a non-violent manner, but also in a very explicit way to showcase another possibility for the world, I think it's something that can be done. I just want to conclude saying that I don't know, maybe I'm old, but I'm starting to get old, but I don't think we can achieve change in 1 minute. There is not one action that change the world in one moment, in one action. I think we always need to look at things as processual and expansive. But as a Palestinian person told us of the assembly, for example, although the tragedy of Gaza and the genocide and the ethnic cleansing and the apartheid is incredibly sad and deep, on the other side, he said that there was never such a level of solidarity with Palestine as in the last 18 months. And I also want to say that, for example, for me, it's also a sign of change, the fact that the directors of No Other Land won the Oscar. I mean, the Oscar, and again, the media industry is an incredible platform with a political power in itself, which of course is not like a vote in the Council of the United Nations, but still it's a political form of change, and having the stage of the Oscar is something that they achieved, and it's quite incredible and should be somehow celebrated as a form of influencing power.
So yeah, basically you've told us how arenas for battle could be universities, could be even the Oscars, and of course squares. Before you have to leave, Virginia, we're just going to make the most of the last 8 minutes with the questions from the audience. Virginia, yes, and I invite everyone both in the room and online to think about questions for the whole panel. And yeah, either keep them for in a bit in the room or use the chat on Zoom for those online. Francesco.
Thank you. I have a question for Virginia, but we can also go over it with the rest of the panel. We heard from George, UN had a mission, and this mission is somehow being accomplished on some, more basic needs that the nations had. Colombo was hinting that we have some urgency, which are probably not well handled at the moment. And we heard also the stories from Carine and Oleksandra and Virginia. So the question I want to ask Virginia, in her role as activist, is probably the best suited to answer this. Seems there's a gap between real world and UN layer of power or willingness or goals. And we are all here to bridge it. In your experience, what's the fastest way? What's the best way? And I appreciate what you just said. It's a big complex world, right? A lot of subjects. But what works the best? What's your advice to be there and be this bridge between UN and people?
Okay, thanks. I spent also 4 years in Brussels, co-founding a movement myself that then I left, which the purpose was exactly how to use democracy as a way for citizens to get into the system. First of all, I think it's something I want to share with all of us. I think we have a privilege to be in the position of discussing how to improve democracy. Often when someone struggles on a level that it doesn't have the time to think on how to change the democratic process in itself. And I think we should recognize the privilege that we have to be in a comfortable space to think how this can be done better. And in a way, this is my first answer to your question. So recognizing the privilege that we have to think about radical reforms. I think the way to accelerate the process, in my opinion, is the intuition that is becoming more and more common about democratic innovations at all levels. It can be the local level, the national level, and the transnational level. I'm thinking about the campaigns on citizen assemblies, or I prefer to call them popular assemblies, strengthening tools like referendum, popular initiatives, creating influence. And I don't see this as a magic recipe to solve the problems, but I think it's in this moment where the representative dimension of democracy is getting taken over through the tool itself of representative democracy. I think we have a window of opportunity to create more space and to hold space for groups that are excluded from the democratic functioning. So I think we should really try to imagine which tools can be strengthened and implemented in the system to create more arenas, more space for deliberation, more spaces of influence, more spaces that can be a bridge between the square, which is never just a square, is also a place full of people that have also other identities that come into place. So, for example, during my experience in the encampment, I wasn't just a camper. I mean, I was, of course, a person doing an encampment, but I was at the same time a member of my family, a person that studies at the university, a worker in a certain organization. So I think a role for groups like the coalition that we or you are trying to build is how we can bring these identities in multiple places and how we can force those empowered to reform the institutions to do some reforms that create more space for more groups to have an influence in the mechanism of power.
Thank you, Virginia. There is another question from here. Wait, if it's for George, I just wanted to prioritize questions for Virginia.
It's related to what
Okay, go
she
for it.
says, and she can react maybe to that as well. George, what she says about this citizens' assembly thing. I know there are attempts to have a kind of a world citizens' assembly where citizens by ballot are forced together. Do you see that as a possible thing within the UN constellation?
Before George responds, I just wanted to say, Virginia, if you have to leave us, we just wanted to say bye and thank you so much for being here with us. Of course, feel free to stay and listen if you want, but thank you very much.
Thank you for having, and sorry for having to leave early, but super thought-provoking. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
First of all, let me say that I fully agree with what Virginia has said about the importance of, sometimes we call it the diplomacy of the people. They have a strong influence, sometimes determinant influence on the diplomacy of the states. Have in mind Vietnam. Vietnam was not exactly won on the military ground. It has been won on the legitimacy ground, on the public opinion ground, because of the massive demonstrations, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. The case of the solidarity for Palestine is again one of let's say, demonstrative example. Let's have in mind that in order to have success in similar struggles, they must be global. They must not be limited in one part of the world. In Europe, we're a tiny part of the world. And we must also have in mind the suspicion of the rest of the world towards us that goes back to the times of the colonies. Desmond Tutu has a very nice story of that. He was saying that the white people came and they gave us the Bible and they told us, close your eyes and pray. And we did that. And when we opened our eyes, we had the Bible and they had our land. So you understand that there is a deep embedded suspicion of the global South, and that this resonates on the double standards that we have on how we treat different situations. Let's say Ukraine and Gaza, regarding the Europeans. Regarding now the direct democracy thing, I think is very, very crucial, especially in renovating our democracies. Our democracies are in crisis. If you look at the levels of trust in our European and also American political systems, our political systems are on the brink of collapse. That's why we had Trump. That's why we have the collapse of the old system here in Italy, Brexit, and so on. The only way to, let's say, reinvigorate the feelings that it is a real democratic thing is direct democracy, referenda, public initiatives, what Virginia has said. It's more difficult for the United Nations, besides what's happened already now, participation of the civil society, because in order to have a really, let's say, genuine democracy, we need a kind of demos. That means a public space where we can have majorities and minorities. There are now proposals, for instance, for a world parliament. Imagine that if we had a parliament based on the one vote, like the traditional parliaments, 1/3 of this UN parliament would be represented by China and India. We are not now at the level of institutional maturity to have something like that. What we can have is what we are trying to do here in Atlas, participation of people in different areas of political and public life that resonate at the level of the diplomacy of the states, as I have said before.
Thank you, George. Okay, we're gonna move on to considering the idea that we're really here to discuss, which is the potential for a global coalition for freedom. And Colombe, I'm going to come to you. You founded Atlas, and you have been active in shedding light on the absence of such a coalition and the shortcomings of today's. But yeah, so if we want to envision how we could change things, how could such a coalition look like? Just to try and picture it. Like, would it be? I've heard things like an expansion of the European Union, for example. What do you think it could look like, and do you think it should be the solution?
Okay, let me start by being honest. I have no idea. We're here to figure it out. I can tell you what we consider to be the problem, why we brought incredible speakers, and what our hypotheses are. And then this afternoon, we're actually having a consultation to kind of discover this together. I have a lot of ideas. A lot of them are completely unfeasible. So we need to figure out together how to actually make it work. So the problem, we heard about Rwanda, we heard about Ukraine, we heard about Palestine, we heard about a lot of historical struggles and anti-colonial struggles, etc. What we're tackling today here is not a lot of the global issues that were mentioned, like climate, inequalities, access to vaccines, etc. Those need to be tackled. And I think a lot of those topics are being tackled almost adequately by the United Nations. When it doesn't touch on democracy and freedom, I think the UN often manages with failures, but to deal with some of those topics. It did manage to distribute more vaccines during the pandemic, right? Like, a lot of people are alive thanks to it. And it is saving lives with food programs every single day, almost eradicated polio. I can go on the list of successes. I think the UN is doing very well in this. What I think it profoundly sucks at is freedom. And we see it with Ukraine, we see it with Palestine, we see it with all of the struggles I mentioned. Due to its structure, due to 5 countries being able to veto actions, we see it. So again, yesterday, actually in Milan, the Atlas team projected on the EU headquarters. I see Francesco smiling because he came to carry the generator. Projected on the EU headquarters, and maybe we can actually show it later. I don't know if you managed to access any social media. And a picture of Putin giving a, how do you call it in English, a baby bottle? A baby bottle to a European baby. I would love to find the image. It's quite striking because in 2024, Europe bought more than ever before record levels of natural liquefied gas from Russia. More than ever before. We are directly financing the war efforts of Russia in Ukraine. It's insane. We're supposed to have sanctions, we're supposed to have targeted sanctions, and there are so many loopholes that we are directly financing war, planes, bombs, kidnappings, etc. Right? It is insane. So I think on this, the UN fundamentally failed to impose enough targeted sanctions, enough embargoes on Russia so that it doesn't have the possibility to invade and occupy Ukraine from 2014 onwards. I think the same goes with Palestine. My country, France, Italy, is the 3rd biggest provider of weapons to Israel. And the US is the first one, Germany is the second one. We have failed to impose a total arms embargo, a full embargo, and targeted sanctions, boycotts, divestments until the end of apartheid, occupation, and war on Gaza, on the West Bank, on every single Palestinian authority. And that, for me, is the purpose of the UN. It's to ensure peace and security. We do not live in a peaceful and nor a secure world. And I'm just mentioning 2 conflicts to mention the 2 traditional East versus West type of struggles, because in this sense, the US, from the US to Russia, all are guilty and complicit in war. To a different extent, but all are guilty and complicit. I managed to, this was the first time we tried a live projection. So this is what we projected yesterday to try to raise awareness behind that. It's freaking insane, right? So this is the problem. The UN sucks at dealing with freedom. It's due to its makeup. I'll let you check it out. It's more interesting than what I'm saying.
Now there's no English quality.
It's due to its makeup. If it's my stories, it's gonna cut.
I'm gonna go on your.
Sorry. You can all check my Instagram profile at the same time.
Here. How is it going? In Italian and English.
We have Yassine here. You can raise your hand who's trying to carry the projector in the right direction. So that's why it moves a bit. And from this point on, what do we do? How do we ensure that we tackle freedom adequately and systematically? Because, for example, and I'm sorry, Carine, I'm going to point to you because you shared your story, right? You did an incredible work in mobilizing parliaments, governments, etc. theoretically, it should be systematic in the world that we actually want to live in, right? Like, I know all of the limitations. I understand them. I understand the makeup. I understand how difficult we want to try it. It is. But if we want to build something new, we have to imagine how it should be. The fact that you had to go government from government and be like, look, I'm paraphrasing. Look, guys, suspend aid until my dad has access to food and is not tortured. It's insane, right? Like, it is absolutely mental. Same for Ukraine. The fact that even that Zelensky is put in this situation is insane. So how do we build a world where this is systematic and where we don't have to go and beg for the big powers to suddenly care if it's not in their economic interest or if it's with their allies? For me, this is the question of what we actually need to tackle. How do we deal with freedom struggles? How do we support them? How do we stop war crimes, crimes against humanity, apartheid, occupation, every single time together? Because like it's been said, in unity, I think we have strength and we can actually do it. I'll conclude with 3 quick ideas. And this is from our policy team that has worked on it. One of them is to do it within institutions. So to start building within institutions, within the United Nations, for example, and outside, a democracy caucus. So take South Africa, take Kenya, take India, take Brazil, take European countries, bring them together and say, okay, we are actually going to coordinate and commit, again, it's up to their willingness, commit that every time this happens, we have to take some things in this list of actions. Sanctions, arms embargoes, boycotts, etc. We have to. Otherwise, we are kicked out and we no longer have access to this coalition. And then to make it a bit stronger and a bit sexier, because you need to make democracy sexy for people to want to stay in it, you add a democracy fund, right? Countries finance, support democracies and transitions and democracies, and you make it also good for the countries inside. Take the EU. It's great. Some of you are from neighboring countries, you could come here. Free movement. Trade incentives. You ensure that democracies can actually get stronger together this way. And this way, in the UN, they would try, and outside of the UN, to push for sanctions, for embargoes, for support in a systemic manner. That's one idea. Another idea is you take it out, and I think Carine can actually take this on afterwards with the idea of the World Liberty Congress, and I'll let you explain how it would actually work, right? And the third idea is you use existing coalitions like the European Union, the African Union, and others to try to push forward this idea. But again, I think the problem is how do we do so without being hypocrites? How are we not complicit in so many struggles? How do we stop it and build something new for people to have faith in those institutions? I don't know how we make it happen, right? I want to figure out with you this today, but I think we need to be clear on what we actually need to achieve. And the fact that this is not intellectual masturbation, it's actually people being killed, murdered, bombed, occupied on the ground. So we need to do this. I'm sorry.
That's indeed about solving the problem systematically, and that's what we want to do. So perhaps, Carine, if you can elaborate on your experience with the World Liberty Congress, which is aimed to do exactly that.
Thank you. So I've talked about how the fact that the world came together, that people, movements, individuals around the world came together to help in advocating for my father and the other political prisoners in Rwanda is really what led to his release. It was the coming together of people across borders, across region, that put enough pressure on the regime so that it became so costly for them to have him and the others prisoners and to release them. My husband, who's in the room, he's proudly Italian, and he was always my worst, my biggest cheerleader, my worst critic, always says, "Okay, but what's the action? What are you doing? What are you going to do about it?" And that's precisely what we're doing at the World Liberty Congress. We are a network, an alliance of activists from authoritarian countries who are fighting at the front lines of the fight against autocracy, for democracy, either in country or in exile, to bring change and to bring democracy in our countries. And the World Liberty Congress was created precisely because international institutions failed to protect pro-democracy movements and pro-democracy activists and freedom fighters who are at the front line. The fact that we have political prisoners around the world in 2025 is crazy. The fact that you have people dying by bombs and we're still watching it on TV and seeing it every single day is absolutely insane. And then the fact that these dictators are utilizing international institutions to shield themselves from accountability and to protect and to go after dissidents, opposition leaders, journalists, human rights activists across international borders to silence them, not just in their countries, but wherever they are in the world. That is exactly all the problems that the World Liberty Congress seeks to address. And by building this coalition, by building this alliance of individuals from these countries, whether in country or in exile, we are creating cooperation and collaboration of movements. We are learning from each other. The idea behind the World Liberty Congress is that we acknowledge that dictators and dictatorships work together. Russia is working with Venezuela. We know Putin and Maduro are tight. We know Kagame and Museveni are learning from each other. And so if we bring together the democracy activists from those countries to also learn and work together, we are countering this force. And on top of this, as I mentioned, I think today there is 70% of the world population is currently living under autocracy. And that number is, again, insane to recognize. But it means that there are political prisoners in many countries. And we've created a handbook to help families who find themselves in this situation and to learn how to advocate for the release of their loved ones, whether it's by mobilizing global governments and parliaments and international institutions and individuals to come to their support, or whether it's what they can do within their own country with the legal system and the limitations of their own system in order to fight for the freedom of their loved ones. We've created a playbook on how to fight autocracy within countries, and we are teaching people in within other countries how to support grassroots movements in training them on fighting back without violence. We are teaching how to utilize AI, because AI is now everywhere, how to utilize AI and Bitcoin, in fact, to fight back, because it's one way of attaining financial freedom. And so there is a lot of mechanisms, a lot of things that we can learn from each other. This is why the World Liberty Congress exists, is really to learn from each other in the same ways that those dictators are learning from each other.
So I hope you took notes, because indeed, as Colombe said, this afternoon, we're going to discuss how this global coalition idea could look like. And this is very good, of course, very good inspiration, very good example for these discussions. I'm going to go back to George, because one of the other options that Colombe has outlined was using or maybe reforming, the current institutions, working with what we have. And I mean, you mentioned earlier, good luck with changing, did you say the veto of the Security Council, or good luck with, like, I want to challenge, or I want to try to challenge that, like, do you really think it's not possible to change it? And, or maybe something could be changed, and how? If not that, what else of those structural issues could reasonably be solved? Because Atlas is pretty ambitious about that, and we wanna get there.
I must tell you that although all of us agree on the principles, we have a disagreement on the means. I'm going to make it more concrete with a little story. The General Prosecutor of the ICC, of the International Criminal Court, has said, after he has prosecuted Netanyahu and Gallant, the Minister of Defense, that a senior Western official approached him and told him, "What are you doing? ICC is not for democracies. ICC is just for Africa and thugs like Putin." What I'm contesting now is exactly the narrative that we should not, let's say, found our efforts on global fora like the United Nations, but on the distinctions between democracies and autocracies. My argument is that if we're doing that, practically, we are reviving the old colonial narrative of civilized and not civilized nations, which is the 25% that we identify as democracies. Europe, USA, Canada, plus, okay, Australia, South Korea, and Japan. How can we persuade the global South that we are not have a judgmental approach towards them, very, very similar to the colonizers' narrative? Try to transform that to concrete steps. If we ask for a special tribunal for Ukraine, aren't we contesting the universal jurisdiction of the ICC? If the response to that is that ICC cannot tackle the aggression crime, this demonstrates more the hypocrisy of the European states. Because after the Kampala agreement, ICC has the jurisdiction to have also the crime of aggression. But the European states, not all, half of the European states have not done that. So my basic argument is we must fully strengthen the efforts of the United Nations as a global institution. We must try to change what is undemocratic. I'm not against the reform of the Security Council. But as I said, if we want to pick our fights, it's not a priority because as the thing starts now, in order to have such a reform, all 5 people must be in agreement. That's, of course, not a choice for today. So, my suggestion is to continue to do what you are doing. It's vital. It is vital the people to be against injustices. But it's also to be vital to understand where we stand, what Europe has done for the world, that we are not above historical injustices. And we must have in mind what the Africans or the Asians have in mind when they consider us.
Thank you, George. And, Oleksandra, I'm coming to you next because should we, even if we are able to build a system that works and that is able to uphold freedom and human rights in the future, that doesn't erase what's been done in the past. And you've mentioned earlier, for example, Stalin has never been held accountable, or of course Putin right now is not being held accountable. So I wanted to hear from you, what do you think a systemic way to hold those that perpetrate injustices and attacks to freedom? What would be a way to systematically hold them accountable?
No, I just want to put at the table one more like idiomas. We speak about freedom, but we don't speak about human dignity, because freedom, social freedom, have a measure. So it's normal. We not live one by one at the planet. We always live with people. And sometimes if you Hatshepsut and dying 8,000 years before, you will flew into the women now, because that was first pharaoh at old Egypt, who showed that women can rule. But when we speak about human dignity, after Second World War, we have a consensus that human dignity important, and now we don't have it. We speak about mechanism which started at the moment that was a consensus that better be a democracy, and now we don't have it. 50 years before was signed Helsinki Final Act and create Organization of Security and Cooperation in the Europe. And they use the consensus principle because they're trying to show that each country, even country who don't have so much, success at economic or something like this, have an equal voice. And now they live without a budget 3 years because Russia has same consensus voice. And before even Russia, that was Belarus there, that was Kyrgyzstan there, that was always was someone who trying to break the some consensus. So I think before rebuild, renew, we need to come back to the category and need to figure out we trying to what kind of freedom to protect. Elon Musk and Trump have absolutely freedom and resources. And I'm scared of this future. And I don't want to say that these people need to be, I don't know, arrested or something like this. So I just need to mention that before the future exists the human dignity. And protect human dignity brings back values of human dignity that, as for me, need to be first step for people and for structure with these people create. Because all of these states, it's not breeding by Martians. I'm waiting them, but they're not still here. But all of the state was built by people. And how they looks like, that's result how we organize them. If you don't do that, so that's why they look like this. And so that's, I want to come back to this point, that human dignity, even people which we don't like human dignity, need to be respected, and we again need to make sexy and attractive this concept. Because new technology give us a lot of differences. Now we look at the people who can manage with smartphones or AI or something like this. Like, guys, you need to educate, but maybe these people will never have opportunity to manage it. We every time think about that, okay, it's so comfortable, comes here by plane, but we live 3 years without planes, because at the territory where the war going, you can have an aviation. And that means even you have a Nobel Peace Prize, you still need to spend 3 days to go out from Ukraine and comes back. So it's about, I'm really supported thinking about privilege, because now Europe had a privilege exactly, don't have a normal army and normal military budget more than 50 years and spend all of this time for comfortable life, for healthcare. Maybe you see the problems, but it's less the problems that you can have if you have it. And now, answer to like make this budget more, it's same, it's temporary. It's not the answer for long term. So I just propose to start from this thing, human dignity and how it can be at international level by modern time with modern technology. Because who will respond with action of autonomic gangs, and they exist, we at Ukraine will produce them a lot, because it's only one way how we can fight against the army 5 times more than we are. And that will be like a new nuclear weapon. I mean, we need international rules how to use guns without decision of people who kill the people.
Now I'd like to address questions from the audience. So if you can please raise your hands, make me know that you want to ask a question. So I'm going to take one from the back there. It doesn't work. Okay.
You share the moderator as speaker.
And maybe this one.
I think it was before.
Yeah, hi. No, I just wanted to thank you first for all your inputs and presentations. My question would be most mainly for Oleksandra. In the past few years, me personally, and I think lots of us actually, have met incredible people showing great resiliency from Ukraine, who changed their life, changed their career paths as well, to innovate and to support and to share lessons to fight back the aggression in your country. But we also know that this cannot go on forever, right? So my question would be, how do you see this constellation of Ukrainians around the world, really, fighting back and finding new and innovative ways to lobby for support from other populations, but also finding new ways to always fight back. How do you see these organizations, which you are a great part of course? How do you see it evolving, and I mean, how long do you see it lasting still?
I think the part of these Ukrainians will be a part of other society, not Ukrainian society. As for me, it's absolutely normal to have a few national identity. Ukraine is a political nation. Some of us, we even can fully recognize ethnic, belonging. But Ukrainians, that's people who feel responsibility. That when we speak about we choose the democracy, that's mean we feel it, that nobody bring it to us. We need to fight for that and build it. Because biggest fight which I see ever is between Ukrainians. We have one of the best organized World Congress of Ukrainians. It's diaspora organization, best organized in the world. And still in the London we have two diasporas, because one of them for Bandera, other from Milnukivsk. Nobody exactly remembered about that at Ukraine, but it's conserved in London, So Ukrainians are not perfect. Ukrainians just the people. All of us exactly coming from Africa. One beautiful woman from Africa, of course, all of us, our genetic from there. So some of Russian, Ukrainian families still exist, and they are not peace fight because different model of state fighting. So next it will be a future, and this future will consist of decision of concrete people and decision with whom people want to join. Best way, as for me, join the people which you feel better because of your values, exactly like near. Because when we receive a Nobel Peace Prize together with the Russian and Belarus human rights defenders, what kind of reaction we have at Ukraine? Don't take it. Okay, you will have your own Nobel Peace Prize, don't take it. Why not? But we know why we need it, because it gives us a lot of places where we can speak, and then it pick it up with whom we can speak. We repeat our messages from 2014, and new politicians say, "Oh, so fresh idea." So that's good news. We don't have all the factors to make analysis and predict whole. Thank God, because that's our chance exactly. And one more good news, that your decision every day have a sense. And we don't know what will happen with states, but we know that 7 billion people in the planet, surely part of them will have some emotional and productive lives. And I hope that they bring more and more new ideas how to live together. Because that's a problem of humanity, how live together, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. We're taking 2 questions and then 2 answers in a row. So if you can ask yours, Yassine, and then the woman over there.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the panelists for this talk. My question is also to Oleksandra, and it's related to Matteo's question. But I'd love to hear what the other panelists think as well. Over the past 3 years, we've seen and participated in the struggle of the Ukrainians. And I'm curious to understand why Zelensky has sided with Netanyahu. We have seen this very publicly. We have even seen this weird intellectual gymnastic where the Ukrainian question was kind of made in relationship to the Israeli question, where they were kind of putting themselves together. The confusion to me is absurd and hard to understand. We see the Eiffel Tower and probably many different embassies raising the Ukrainian flag, and yet the Palestinian flag is not allowed in football stadiums, for example. So how do you compute this paradox between these two freedom struggles?
Yeah, we take another question.
Thank you. Nothing to do exactly with this part of the slide. It's Talia Zafra here from Spain, representing Political Watch. And I have a question about how to speak about democracy. Let me tell you a short story. I met some weeks ago with the young founders of a new online media outlet in Spain called What If. Speaks a lot about the future. And I was trying to sell a piece of news about democracy and participation, and young participation in the future of our democracy. And the founder told me, I cannot talk about democracy on my outlet because what I have learned from my audience figures is that when I write down the word democracy, people under 14 stop reading the newsletter or stop reading the article. So if our target is young people to make the democracy of the future we all want, or at least part of, how we can talk about the democracy we need without talking the democracy. Maybe the dignity issue, maybe the housing issue, maybe the climate issue are there, and we need to put them together or even change the name of the future we want. But the democracy is not sexy anymore for people under 14, and we need them. We cannot build this without this group I'm not belonging to anymore. So can you help me with this answer?
Yeah, yesterday we have a really interesting meeting at Roma, and they told, democracy quite evangelistic. Maybe trying this one, start to speak about from religion point of view. But I just answered, it's two big different conflicts. I mean, Ukrainian and Israel, Palestine situation, because at Ukraine, nobody understood, for example, too less knowledge about situation with Palestine, and nobody understood why exactly terrorists from Palestine who killed 1,000 people 7th of October have so much passion. I'm just explaining you how it looks like from the place where we not use the Twitter at all. Twitter not popular. And we analyzed about how much exactly Xnet, how they put the money and opportunities exactly to spread the Palestine topic. And again, I will not speak about that people not suffering in Palestine or something like this. But you need to understand that some result of your common knowledge sometimes is absolutely as a bubble out of the world. When I come to Israel, I see, first of all, everywhere, it's a yellow label and question about refugee, or not refugees, but hostages of Israel. Out of Israel, maybe once a month, someone think about 200 people. And now, again, it's not because some of them more important or something like this, but you need to understand, if you want to speak with someone, or if you want to have understanding motivation, act or not act in something, you need to understand which bubble they are inside. Maybe you have more information from something, but maybe you don't have other information that they have. And waiting that Palestine flag will come to the official embassies till we will not have exactly procedure how to recognize new countries. We don't have. Do you have? I don't know. At Balkan, we still have a Kosovo. Are you recognize Kosovo? Do you see ever support of Kosovo in some embassy? Again, it's different stories, but it's one of the moments which we don't have still at UN some procedure how to recognize new state. And we not organized it, not someone, we with you not organizing to have such procedure. So so Ukraine and Israel, we can compare 70 years of really difficult story with huge suffering, with huge numbers of aggressive act against each other. That's bring us a much deeper story than conflict between Russia and Ukraine. I told you, Russian-Ukraine conflict, quite simple. It's old aggression from 18th century, certainly.
But the same with Israel, right? It colonized Palestine. Palestine was there before, it colonized.
Not saying any colonization, not saying at all.
It's a, no, but
Not saying. My position, not saying your position can be other, it's okay.
I'll go with it.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think what I'd like to say is in relation to bring us back to the concept of freedom and the concept of dignity, of human dignity that we eloquently shared earlier. And to address what you raised about democracy being sexy, as well as address what you raised about the West, democracy being a Western concept. With the risk of the United Nations focusing on democracy being annihilating the global South, which I think are all flawed. My view and what I think is important to remember is that democracy is a form of political freedom, and freedom is a universal human aspiration. We all want freedom. We all want democracy is more, and freedom is more than just political, a political form of freedom. It is democracy is more than just a political form of freedom. It's a freedom of expression. It's freedom from repression. It's human dignity. And so we shouldn't treat it. We should remember when we talk about democracy not being sexy. What is at the core? What's at the core is literally your right to live, your right to breathe, your right to speak. And when we start using too many words to describe these things, we forget what's fundamental and what is at risk. And I say this because a lot of the people I work with, as I mentioned, are on the front line, are being jailed, they're being taken in, they're being tortured, their very life is on the line. And so we can talk big titles and big concepts, but most importantly, what we should remember is the fact that we have to put the fight for democracy and the fight for freedom is the remembering that we all are entitled to, and we should be ensure that everyone has access to those most basic human rights, which includes all those freedoms that I have shared earlier.
I something and I agree with 99% that I just wanted to link three things together for this afternoon first to give an example of what Yassine actually said. The reason for which we want to do this is we see hypocrisy all around in the way we deal with freedom struggles. And I'm going to give you one simple example of how I envision it. It's neither about Ukraine, it's neither about Palestine, but it's actually going to link it. I was at COP in a dictatorship in Azerbaijan to try to understand how you actually mobilize in dictatorships against a dictator. And something really random happened. I was taking a video of something I thought was funny, and it ended up being really not funny. I was taking a video of journalists looking like bees around honey. So there was someone walking, and there were like 10 journalists going like this around, and I was like, this is like, I'm going to send it to a friend. It looks like bees. And it was actually the top leaders of the Taliban regime walking and all of the journalists around. Most of you will be familiar with what's happening in Afghanistan, gender apartheid, absolutely no democracy. Women have less rights than a bird or a cat, as Meryl Streep famously said, right? And I posted this online being like, it's surreal experience. Surreal. I see the top leaders of the Taliban, one of the worst regime, and I think in most places on earth we can agree it's actually one of the worst regime on the planet, passing in front of me, free to go, at an international conference with journalists asking them questions, and I'm smiling. Insane. I put like, I'm living on Mars with aliens. This is insane. And I post this online, and I'm online very pro-Ukraine, very pro-Palestine, and I'll get into this in a second. And suddenly, and I get a lot of shit as a result, to put it really. And suddenly I get from everyone attacks on criticizing the Taliban. And then it made me very, very sad to consider that for a second it's a debate whether the Taliban are a terrible regime and whether it is gender apartheid or not. And so I tried to understand for a little bit of time, how is this a question that what this regime is doing should be considered a crime against humanity, that gender apartheid should be a crime against humanity, that this is insane, that it is unacceptable. How are we questioning this? I say a lot of things that you can disagree with. How is women having no rights to stand outside and do what they want? A controversial, that this is insane, a controversial statement, right? And I started reading as a result, which you should never do, an insane amount of comments under the video. And a lot of it was not about the women, about Afghanistan or about the Taliban. A lot of it was about the US. And I'm very happy to criticize the US 99% of my day. I'm French, just like in Ukraine, you argue a lot. My national sport is protesting and arguing with French people, right? So I'm very happy to do it. But this was not about the United States. We can all agree that the United States should not be financing the war on Palestine and so on, but this was not about the United States. This was about a terrible regime impacting the lives of women, imprisoning basically at the end of the day, putting women in a type of cage. This was about this, right? But it became about the US. And it drove me mad. So I started arguing with people. I couldn't compute. So for really, I took like days to try to compute. And at one point, I actually understood that the hatred that those people had for the United States, and those people, by the way, were not coming from any, I actually ended up stalking a lot of them, from any country we actually spoke about here, right? That their hatred was much stronger than what we're actually talking about. And I think this translates to a lot of things, right? People didn't care about Afghanistan. People didn't care about women. People didn't actually care about all this. They cared about the fact that they didn't like the US because of what the US is doing to Palestinians. And I'm seeing a lot of the same reactions when I'm talking about Ukraine. I receive a lot of messages, but no, wait, the US and Europe are supporting Ukraine, so Ukraine is bad. Because those people don't like, and I'm seeing a lot of this with Palestine. I'm seeing a lot of it of, well, no, Europe and the US on the side of Israel, so Palestine is bad. And I think a lot of the time, it's the hatred of one bloc, Russia, the US, the West, or however one you want to compute it, that is more important than those people you speak about. And this drives me insane, but also makes me actually question humanity, right? And it's obviously no struggle is the same. And I don't mean when I say it's the same, I don't mean to compare. Every single struggle is different and the history is different. The truth is we're talking about the coalition for freedom, and we mean freedom in terms of freedom struggles, people that are surviving for their survival as a group. Because people are being massacred. And when we consider that our humanity is less important than the people we hate, we kind of already lost. And so I'm trying to understand, to go back to Yassine's, I'm talking from a European perspective, right? From someone who's French. I come from a Jewish family, partially Jewish family. So I got a lot of, for example, anti-Semites and hate online, etc. On the other hand, every time I speak about Palestine, people bring it back to 1,000 hostages versus 50,000 people that have been murdered and over 1,000 hostages in Israeli prisons. There's always this caveat. It's insane. We're talking about decades long of apartheid, occupation, murder, etc. It is insane. And when we focus more on the people we hate versus the people we actually want to support, it's what's wrong. So my question, again, I'm asking you a question because I really don't have the solution, is how on earth we start doing this systematically based on freedom. And I mean, Carine gave an incredible description of freedom, but based on freedom, human dignity as well, as you mentioned, and not based on which bloc you don't like. Honestly, who cares? They are political constructs, right? Some countries are committing horrible crimes. More or less all of our countries here are involved in some. Ukraine, no, but most of our countries are involved in some. How do we create this and do it better? Again, I don't know. This is great.
We must clarify two important things. Democracy is not a Western concept. All struggles for liberation of the peoples had in their center democracy as rule of the people, as self-determination rule. My point is that our states have used democracy hypocritically as a political tool. The Americans did not invade Iraq in order to export democracy. We have done, the Europeans, the same in Libya. My second point, freedom is important. It is the core, together with human dignity, human rights. Speaking about the international scene, we must have always in mind that freedom is not just an individual right. Freedom applies to the people. People have the right of self-determination. So the fights for freedom must always have in mind that there are parallel freedoms for peoples and for individuals. It was important, the question about politics and the young. It's not democracy which is boring, it's politics that for the young people is, in the best case, boring, in the worst case, a dirty thing. Why we have this prevailing concept? Because the majority of the young people do not believe that their opinion counts. It is not just for the young people, it is a majoritarian now belief in our societies that whatever we do, major decisions are out of our reach. Central banks are determining economic policy, European Union and Europe. So, and again, this is becoming worrisome. There are a lot of surveys in which people which are below 25 years old say that democracy is not important for us. On the other hand, look at the success of TikTok. TikTok conveys political messages, but it conveys political messages in a way that are understandable for the young people. So what we can do about that? We must show to the young people that their participation in the political struggles can have results. Palestinian encampments are a clear example. Other more localized fights, for instance, against privatization of water, are similar cases. That's why I believe that what we are doing here in Atlas is very, very important, because you manage to mobilize people, and especially what Colombia is trying to do, despite our differences, she's trying to motivate people for a very abstract concept, which is even more difficult than concrete things. And your efforts resonate. There are a lot of young people who are supporting that. So my message is that we must be optimistic. It is not a lost case. Neither democracy nor politics for the young people. But we must try to choose our fights, as I said before, because it's important not to be theoretical. Somebody must show results when he participates or she participates in the political struggles. And then try to be sexy, as we say. Do not have our old way of speaking to the people, because of course it is also a generational thing.
So we've seen a lot of emotions on stage, which was maybe the intention of the panel. We're gonna just close it with one. I just want to close on a more positive note, perhaps. So I'm gonna ask a rapid fire to every single panelist, starting from George. What makes you hopeful about the future? If you could answer in 30 seconds, and then I'm gonna go all the way down to Colombia.
But I said it already. I'm very optimistic because I'm looking at you, all these young people in this room.
I would say the same thing. I mean, the fact that we're all here mobilized today to talk about this very topic, but also I'm hopeful when I see collaboration, cooperation across borders. I'm hopeful when I see political prisoners being released, and that's because of the result of everyone coming together and putting enough pressure to make that happen. And yeah, we have a lot to do. There's a big fight ahead of us, but the fact that we are here is already reasons to hope.
You know, it will be not easy be a generation of and take off all of this mess. But young people from Ukraine, your age, will be veterans. They will be traumatized. It will be like million traumatized Ukrainian children. So you know how Ukrainian society reacts for that. Most popular for student profession now is psychologist. And I think that's one of the way you always can think about what you personally can do. And after this, find someone second who's same think about that, and maybe third one. And that will be a law of small group. Law of small group, it's way how you can always be together with the people who share with you. Thank you.
Hopeful when I see people from so many different countries that are willing to go beyond their differences, and we probably have a lot of them, but to actually look at what we have in common to create this bigger dream. And I'm actually hopeful that we all disagree. I think that makes me very hopeful. I think we're talking about freedom. If change was going to happen one way, we would know it and it would be done. We have no idea how it's going to happen, and we need to push from a lot of different directions, right? I'm more on the radical side of let's try to change it, and if it doesn't work, but it's done and we do it. I will always be considered the radical. We need people in the establishments that are more moderate, that can actually push it through. We need people that go from it from the outside, from the ground up, and so on. So seeing that we disagree actually gives me a lot of hope. If we're all agreeing here, there would probably be something extremely wrong with this panel.
Thank you, Oleksandra, thank you, Carine, and thank you, George. Now we're gonna move on to, I guess, lunch. Back to you.
Thank you.
Before going,